Good afternoon and welcome to HAR Community Conversations. We are here every month having the conversations that matter most to Houstonians. And today we are discussing how to protect your property from flooding with Bill Baldwin. Welcome to the program, Bill.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. This is such an important topic for every Houstonian, and of course, you're going to tell us exactly why. But before we get into everything that I want to ask you today, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in real estate and flood-related issues.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Bill Baldwin. I'm the broker and owner of Boulevard Realty. I've been a realtor now for 28 years. Seems like a very long time. But for the last couple of decades, I've really focused on the intersection of the city and the county and infrastructure as it relates to neighborhoods. I mean, that's really kind of where I got started. A few flooding events get you a little more cognizant of the importance of making sure that our consumers, the renters and the purchasers, understand flooding and flood risk as it relates to their property. So for the last decade, I have intensively spent a lot of time working with local elected officials, national officials, and my primary role is to get people educated, both real estate agents, homeowners associations, neighborhood groups, so that they're aware of what they can do to help keep from flooding.
Thank you so much, Bill. And I feel like this question, should go without saying, but there are so many people who move in and out of Houston on any given day, as we well know. So why is flooding such a big concern in Houston and nearby areas?
Houston is a city that has always flooded. From the 1830s when the Allen brothers landed, I mean, it was known for an area that had the propensity to flood. And often we forget, we bulldoze other things, we pour some concrete, but we forget water is going to find its way through our city on its way to the port of Houston, to the Gulf of Mexico. So it's never not going to flood. We're not going to build our way out of flooding. We just need to learn how to live with the water. And Amsterdam and Venice and other places have learned to do that sort of thing. And so we just have to constantly remind ourselves that there are precautions that can be taken, information that everyone should know about so that they can, like I say, live in the event of a flooding event happening, because flooding will happen. It happens on a very regular basis throughout the city. A summer storm can flood a particular area, and we're just not cognizant of it because it wasn't your particular area. Remember, the city is a very large area, and if you're not impacted on a regular basis, you're not reminded of it. But we do. Hurricane season is a prime opportunity for people to remind themselves, what do I need to know here? What do I need to do to prepare?
Right. So we hear a lot about flood zones, and in a little while I want you to break them down for us. But for now, how can we find out if a home or an apartment is in a flood zone?
Everything is in a flood zone. I mean, there's nothing that's not in a flood zone. And you can tell the base flood elevation or your level of risk anywhere, anywhere. I tell people there's a base flood elevation in Kansas and in Toronto, so you're measuring the distance, from sea level, and then they're calculating the risk. The easiest place for people to go is just FEMA.com. I mean, you can just plug in the FEMA website and you can plug in your address and very easily determine if you're in the 100-year floodplain that people are most
Mhm.
concerned about. I do want to be, and we're going to say this repeatedly, this is a measurement of the land, has nothing to do with the structures. So they're not calculating your level of risk for your home site or your apartment or your rental unit. And the maps are not that accurate. I mean, it's not an assessment of whether or not you're going to flood or not. In the 100-year floodplain, if you have a federally funded mortgage, you're required to have flood insurance. For that particular purpose, that flood determination, that floodplain is accurate. It tells you whether or not you need flood insurance or not if you have a mortgage. It doesn't tell you that your level of risk is high or low. And that's what people often we get misunderstood. We have realtors, oh, check your flood risk by going to the flood map and, avoid the 100-year floodplain. There is no reason to avoid the 100-year floodplain. We have plenty of structures in the 100-year floodplain that don't flood. And likewise, just because you're not in the 100-year floodplain doesn't mean that you're not going to flood. So don't have some
Mhm.
reasonable sense of security because, oh, I'm in the 500 or I'm in zone X, I'm not going to flood. That's not accurate by any means. And we have plenty of data that shows that.
Yeah, so I mean, you mentioned a few of them already. So those different flood classifications, you mentioned X, 500 year, 100 year. What do they actually mean? And it sounds like you're saying they're really, again, not a determining factor on if you will flood. So what do they actually mean?
What they were intended to mean was the level of risk that individuals had in those particular zones for flooding. What's the propensity of flooding? So, and it's a bad analysis. So the 100-year floodplain, people would assume once every 100 years we're going to have a flood. The 500-year floodplains think once every 500 years it's going to flood. So I don't need to worry if I'm in the other 499 years. That's not what it means at all. It has nothing. We should rename these things because even in the 100-year floodplain, every year you have a 1% chance of flooding. And in the term of a 30-year mortgage, that's a 26% chance of you flooding in the 100-year floodplain. It doesn't mean that the event happens that reasonably. You've got to remember, Houston had 500-year flood events, in 2017, 2018, 2019. They happen on a regular basis. They don't happen every 500 years. And we have 1,000-year storms that happen more readily also. So it's not an indication that the storm is not going to happen for another X number of years. It was a percentage deal that was misunderstood. And there again, that rating and that chance is based on the land, so where the land is. It's not telling you if your house is 5 feet up in the air or 6 feet up in the air or 10 feet up in the air. And that may mean that the structure itself is not flooding or not going to flood. So they're very confusing. I wish we would rename this based on the level of risk and not the percentages. The percentages are misleading.
Yeah, there's so many determining factors besides that. So, yes, thank you for breaking that down for us, Bill. You know, do you believe that most people, whether they be renters, buyers, or just even homeowners, truly understand their flood risk, even if they've been in that property a while?
Absolutely not. I mean, I'm 100% confident that the average person does not understand their level of risk, and it's a number of reasons. Like you say, the number of consumers that move into Houston every year, it's hundreds of thousands of people that are moving into the region. They haven't been here during a storm event or a flooding event, and they just don't have the amount of knowledge that they need in order to make an educated decision. The number of
Hmm.
real estate agents, changes also over time, so they wouldn't know what to tell their particular clients along the way. But I mean, and there's this misnomer that I've never flooded in the past is a determination that I'm not going to flood in the future, and that also couldn't be further from the truth. Maybe there are repetitive houses that flood on a regular basis. I get that, but the topography is changing every year. The amount of impervious coverage is changing every year. There's rapid redevelopment north and west of us that's modifying how the flow of the rainfall is making its way to the Gulf. And it's the intensity of the storms. We continue to see the heat of the Gulf of Mexico. Heat and water creates steam, right? It goes up and it's drifting over and it's dropping far greater amounts of water than we've ever had before, and more significantly, at a greater intensity. We're used to kind of thinking this mindset that we're going to get 1 inch of rainfall in an hour, or a few inches over 24 hours. But the reality of it is, we're now getting 3, 4, 5 inches within an hour. You get 1 inch of rain in 15 minutes. That's a 100-year storm, folks. I mean, that happens. It happens, 30, 40, 50 times a year in Harris County. So, all of those factors, that intensity, the topography, the impervious coverage, all of that sort of rapid redevelopment in a city that's unzoned, it modifies. So you didn't flood in the previous 50 years, but now your likelihood of flooding because of development in the last 2 years has increased your odds significantly.
Mhm. Wow. So let's talk about flood insurance. Why is flood insurance important even outside of that 100-year floodplain?
Well, we believe that it's a very good investment in Houston, Texas. Homeowners insurance does not cover rising water. So, and most people think, well, my homeowners insurance is going to cover that sort of thing. And it really doesn't. And insurance companies today, they can be my worst nightmare, but they look for any reason not to cover a claim, right? I mean, that's their kind of major objective, to make a profit and to deny people coverage. But not covering rising water is clearly in the homeowner's insurance. So you'd have to have flood insurance for a water event that was from rising water, water coming through the front door or water coming from the back door. And and we only really tell people you need it in that 100-year floodplain, which is a misnomer because statistically, significantly more structures have flooded outside the 100-year floodplain than have flooded inside the 100-year floodplain for the last 3 decades. I mean, on a consistent basis, not even an event like Harvey, where you had significantly more structures outside the 100-year floodplain, but on a regular basis, we could see claims that were coming outside of the 100-year floodplain. And because it's not required, and we say, oh, it's not necessary, don't get it, people outside the 100-year floodplain typically haven't had it. Now, remember, we're going to get new flood maps, I believe, maybe by the end of this year or the first of next year, and you're going to see a significant increase. I mean, they're telling you in advance, we're adding 50,000 acres to the 100-year floodplain. If you averaged a 4 or 5,000 square foot lot in an acre, you multiply that times 50,000, that's almost 400,000 new homes that potentially could be in the 100-year floodplain, okay, that
Mhm.
aren't in there today. If you have existing flood insurance, there is a cap set by Congress of 18%. So your insurance would be lower, let's just say $900. If you have an 18% increase, then it goes from 900 to 1,050, 1,050 to 1,200, 1,200 to 1,400, 1,400 to 1,800. That's a manageable number. If all of a sudden you didn't have flood insurance and now it's required, you're going to see that cost grow significantly from the $900. So we're encouraging all Houstonians probably need some type of flood insurance. But those that are soon going to be in this flood map are going to be caught off guard and are going to have wished significantly that they had secured the insurance before it was required because of that cap in there. So, I mean, there's a number of reasons to get it. And like I say, it's the number of people that need it outside of the 100-year floodplain that we need to be educating on a regular basis, because that we flood outside the 100-year floodplain. We flood all the time outside of the 100-year floodplain. People outside the 100-year floodplain need to be reminded to look and check and get your flood insurance. And you need flood insurance. You have to, you can't just get it immediately a lot of the times. If a storm is forming and it's in the Gulf of Mexico, you just can't get flood insurance the next day. I mean, there's a waiting period. The insurance companies aren't that stupid. They're going to make you wait till after the storm has passed. And so you have to think about it in advance of a storm. So, yeah, and like I say, I don't think every structure, just because you're in the 100-year floodplain, there should be no stigma against buying that house or selling that
Mhm.
house or owning that house. We have significant areas that are in the 100-year floodplain that do not flood. And we have many structures in the 100-year floodplain that are not going to flood. You have to pay
Mhm.
attention to other factors, not just being in the 100-year floodplain. So, I hear that, we have buyers that come in and say, I don't want to see anything in the 100-year floodplain. Why? It doesn't mean you're going to flood. We should for
Mhm.
sure look at houses in the 100-year floodplain. But at the same level, let's don't be confident because you're not in the 100-year floodplain that you don't have a risk of flooding, because you do. So the flood insurance component is significant. I remind people 83% of the 1.4 million structures in Harris County did not have flood insurance the day Harvey hit. 83% of the structures did not have flood insurance. Of course, there's a big rush after a hurricane event for people to go then and get flood insurance because it's top of the mind. But I'm telling you today, 7 years after Harvey, we have fewer structures insured with flood insurance than we did the day Harvey hit. Today, in 2025, we have fewer structures. The reason, the cost of the insurance is greater than it used to be. We have so many people that have moved in that don't have the history of the flood. I mean, we don't remind people consistently. I mean, it's going to be shocking to the people that are impacted by a flood event in the future that they did not have flood insurance when they had the opportunity to get it. So we have some responsibility to alert people in advance to prepare, or at least evaluate, do you really need flood insurance or not, throughout the entire county or region. Has nothing to do with the 100-year floodplain.
Thank you, Bill. Aside from, you mentioned, people maybe discriminating against a house that's in the 100-year floodplain, or not wanting to see that property, and you telling them it's not just about that, or maybe just not knowing about the 100-year floodplain at all. What are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about flood insurance specifically?
the biggest misconception is that they don't need it. They think they don't need it, and they really do need it. And maybe it hasn't flooded in the past. People don't want to pay insurance and never use it, but the worst thing that could happen to you is you have to use it. It's not a fun event to have a flooding event and move out of your home and deal with mold and deal with potential and deal with contractors. It's supply and demand. When there's a large event, then some unscrupulous contractors come into the region and take advantage of people. So, I mean, you really do need to consider it. And like I say, the other thing is that the misconception is that you really only need it in the 100-year floodplain. It's required there if you have a mortgage, but you need it in all of these other areas. So truly there is a much larger need for people to secure, either flood insurance from the National Flood Insurance Program or private insurance. We see many, many people moving to the private sector for flood insurance, especially high-end houses. Most people have more than $250,000 worth of damage, but especially if you count your personal belongings, and so you would have a higher ability to insure a higher deal through a private flood insurance company. I remind people, almost all of the city of West University Place is in the 100-year floodplain. Almost all of the city of Bel Air is in the 100-year floodplain. We sell houses every day in West University Place and Southside Place and Bel Air. There's no stigma to the city of West University Place. The reality of it is they're a smaller city. They have better addressed their drainage and infrastructure. They have more stringent rules than many other municipalities. And so the houses do not tend to flood in the city of West University Place or the city of Southside Place. So just because, I would hate for someone to say, oh, I'm a doctor, I want to be by the med center, but I don't want to be in the 100-year floodplain. Well, you're going to eliminate some very attractive, valuable places to go to live just because of that stigma. That should not be the stigma. We should pay attention to many other things over here when determining where to go buy a house or where to go rent a house.
Great, great advice. Thank you. We had a couple questions that came in from the live viewers. One's from Val. She is asking, can a flood policy be transferred to a buyer if there is time remaining on the policy?
Federally funded flood insurance policies are transferable to the next homeowner, which is another reason I'm there again. These hundreds of thousands of houses that are not yet in the floodplain that could very well be in the floodplain. Yes, it would be a very attractive proposition to be able to have your flood insurance policy assumed by another buyer. So yes, I failed to mention that is a very compelling reason to go secure the flood insurance now. So yes, they are assumable. The ones that
Excellent.
aren't, there may be some exceptions. USAA, which is a veterans program of lending, has a flood insurance policy, and those policies are not assumable if that person doesn't have the benefits through USAA. But the overwhelming majority of federally funded policies are assumable.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Richard is asking, what is the best source to get current regulations for construction or remodeling in a floodplain for different counties?
The county thing is complicated. I do teach a class. I'm happy to send someone some slides or anyone that wants my slides or whatever. And I really have focused on Harris County and the city of Houston. And people asked me yesterday at the class, each county has a different mindset, and some have been slower to increase their regulations. Montgomery County was particularly slow, I thought, in the beginning to make some of these revisions. They've come on board a little bit more. But areas, Alvin and Manville and whatever particular counties that those are in have been less compelled to increase their requirements. And so every county is different. When you go to you'd find their floodplain manager. Every county, every municipality has an office of floodplain management. And we tell people, so if you're doing work in the city of Bunker Hill, the city of West University Place, the city of Houston, the city of Pasadena. I spoke to a realtor event in Deer Park the other day. It was easy for me to go to Deer Park and find their regulations. By county, it does make it more difficult. The counties are less regulated. The cities don't have ordinance power in the extraterritorial jurisdiction outside of the municipalities. And so building in those areas is particularly easier because there's less permitting requirements, less requirements in general. But there is not an easy way to find the county-wide deals outside of Harris County. And it is difficult. There's no easy way. You just have to plug away at it. We were dealing with one in central Texas, and to find, in a 100-year floodplain, it was very hard to find the regulations in a very small municipality in central Texas. It's very hard.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Bill. What should renters ask about flood risk when they sign a lease?
It boggled my mind. I did spend 3 or 4 years of my time trying to get a notice for tenants because it was insane to me that someone could, rent in Greenspoint, and be flooded during the tax day. And then they move out and someone got flooded in the Memorial Day, and they moved out and someone got flooded during Harvey. And those
Mm,
landlords had no responsibility to tell them that there was a flooding event or not. We went to the legislature. It took over 2 sessions in order to get what very nominal notice we have today, which is for renters, the landlord's required to tell you if there's been flooding in the last 5 years, only the last 5 years. So you could check the box, no flooding in the last 5 years. Didn't mean that you didn't get 11 feet during Harvey. We're begging the legislature to take this back up, and there should be a longer threshold. I have noticed a lot lately because in our temporary leases where we have lease backs, we have forms where the landlord has to tell the tenant, even if it's the landlord just bought the house and now the existing homeowner is going to rent back for a week, they're required to give the notice. And we've been very pleased to see the number of firms that have been reaching out and making sure that even temporary tenants for temporary things know. But other than that, there isn't a lot of notice. And 53% of the residents of Harris County are renters. We have more renters than we have homeowners in our county, and we've not done them a good service. We've not really protected those people, many of which are among the most vulnerable economically and socially, because you can be deceiving. Many institutions, look, we've seen in our industry large scale people, the Blackstones of the world that are buying thousands of houses to rent them out, the municipal funds, all kinds of people are buying houses. Many of those corporations are not from Texas. The guy filling out the forms in Chicago, he doesn't know anything about that house, or their bank or institution owned. They also don't have the responsibility to provide that information. They often don't know it. I tell people, seriously, after Memorial Tax Day and Harvey, I was very nervous about these tenants. Go ask the neighbors. That's
mm,
where they generally were finding out before. Hi, welcome to the neighborhood. Can't believe you rented that house that got 11 feet during Harvey. It was a little hard after you already moved in to figure that out. But I would definitely, there are resources more in Harris County that I'm familiar with, but you can go check the level of inundation in a particular surrounding area through the Harris County Flood Control District website. You could look at historical data. You could go look at August 27th, 2017 and see how high the water got nearby. That might be an indication. But we tell people we're used to thinking about flooding as rising water from a bayou. You pour so much water and the bayou rises. I want to be overly clear, during a massive event like Harvey, that's a concern. We flood so many other ways than from a bayou. You must think about the sheet flow of water, that the water's not coming from a rising bayou, it's coming from the subdivision 2 miles to the northwest of you. It's often coming in your backyard because your French drain is clogged, and now you've gotten 4 inches of rain in the backyard, and you have a new wooden fence with a 12-inch rock board, and the water has nowhere to go. It will find its way through the weep holes of the brick or through the French doors, the old sliding glass window. And we consistently, it'll come from your next door neighbor or the people right to the north of you. I mean, we flood in so many more ways than rising water from a bayou. That is statistically not my biggest concern. My biggest concern is truly its sheet flow. It's knowing where the water is flowing from the watersheds. And of course, people who were inundated from the reservoirs understand that. People near Kingwood have understood, we're impacted by the water in Lake Conroe and Lake Livingston and in Austin, and all of those sort of things have had a huge impact on flooding in many areas. And so we've got to think outside of just this. There's not one way to flood. There's multiple ways to flood. And just in flooding in general, because a lot of these claims often are automobiles. Harris County has the largest number of flooded cars on an annual basis from any city in America. Okay, on a
mm.
consistent basis, we flood 20 to 30,000 cars because we think we're invincible. We don't understand it. There's a heavy downfall at 4:30 in the afternoon, and the corner of Wesleyan and Bissonnette has 4 feet of water in it, guys. I mean, streets are designed to hold water. That's where we're holding the water before it can get anyplace else. And we drive through this water, or our cars flood in our garages or out on the street or whatever. So
Hmm.
many of these flooding events are not necessarily water penetrating into the house, but look, if your car's ruined, if your landscaping is ruined, I mean, those are costly endeavors also that we need to be aware of, especially car flooding and street flooding. We will never not street flood, and it's because I see these chats of, oh, the street's flooding, like we should do something about it intentionally. Every governmental entity is putting water into the street. That's how we manage water. We have no other place to put it than in the street. And we tell people, look, stand in the middle of the street, back to your renter question. And if you're looking up, you're probably pretty good. And if you're looking down, you probably need to be concerned no matter what house you're in. If the water's going to go over the curb. And if you're home site and you're a slab on grade and you're a foot below the crown of the street, you should be concerned. I mean, I think there's a high probability that that house, even if it's never gotten water in it before, very well could get water with the climate events that we're having and the intensity of the rainfall that we're having these days. So be prepared for homes that have never flooded in every event. Back to my class yesterday. I don't worry too much about Harvey. I don't think we're going to have Harvey again. I think we've done things to fix that. It's Imelda. Imelda dropped more rainfall in a shorter period of time than Harvey did. If Imelda event had moved over 5 more miles, which is really not that much for a storm, you'd be talking about hundreds of thousands of houses that would have flooded, that would have never flooded before, would have only flooded during Imelda. And that's the kind of event, intense rainfall, 8, 9, 10 inches over 3 hours will be an inundation that we're not prepared for. And we add significant amounts of concrete. Since Harvey, we've added 400 square miles of concrete, which is impervious coverage, which has altered the flow of water significantly since Harvey. I mean, that's a tremendous amount of concrete that will alter the flow of water during an event like Harvey or Imelda or a future event. So it's not the hurricanes that give me the greatest pain. It's these intense rainfalls that we've never had before coming and falling in an area that had never experienced that before. And like I say,
Yeah.
we very well need to be concerned about what's happening to the west of us or to the north of us.
Hmm. Thank you, Bill. I really like that tip that you said, go stand in the street and look at the home. If you're looking up, it's a good sign. If you're looking down, maybe not as much. What are some other things buyers specifically should look for when they're looking at homes in maybe flood prone areas?
I like, and we had gone down this pathway of trying to provide this information on HAR.com, and that didn't seem to go so well. But I do really like the website Buyers Aware. It was developed by Texas A&M University and the Institute for Disaster Resilient Texas. And by plugging in an address there, it had a risk rating. You can agree or disagree. It's only the land. It had nothing to do with houses. So, I mean, it was not an indication that a house was going to flood, but perhaps the land. And I would think buyers
Mhm.
might want to know that. But what it gave you almost immediately was the number of claims in that area. So,
Mhm.
this house didn't flood, but you can see on their website, there were 900 claims totaling $9 million in a very small geographic area. They rated just the census tract. And you can see the number of people with policies. So I looked at a house the other day. I don't think it's going to flood, but 1,729 of their neighbors all have flood insurance, which is a pretty good indication for some buyer. It's one data point that we think buyers ought to know. What they do with
Mhm.
that, I sell houses that flood. I have sold many houses, and the buyers understand the risk that they're taking, and they want that neighborhood, they want that house, they believe that things are changing. And so long as they are armed with information, that's really our responsibility, not to advise them to not or to buy a house, but to arm them with a certain amount of information that then they can make their own decision. I live in the 100-year floodplain. I do not believe I'm going to flood. I'm just building a house in the 100-year floodplain. It damn well isn't going to flood. I made sure that it isn't going to flood. Just because you're in the floodplain is not a high level of risk to me. Do I need to be a little
Mhm.
more concerned about my cars? Back to these I believe we're going to add significant number of houses to the 100-year floodplain that, and you don't have, you're not going to be able to get flood insurance if you don't have flood vents. So being the ability to go add flood vents to your existing garage in your home that's currently in the 500-year floodplain that doesn't have flood insurance, we're going to have a rash of people putting flood vents in garages when all of a sudden hundreds of thousands of houses, and you won't be able to qualify for the flood insurance without the flood vents. So are you aware that potentially you're buying in the 500-year floodplain that might soon be in the
Mhm.
100-year floodplain, that you might soon need to be required to have flood insurance, that you might soon need to do some precautionary things like installing the flood vents? That's the information I think that makes a really good real estate professional versus one that is not as well coped to deal with it. But buyers need to ask those questions. What's coming
Yeah.
down the path? And we're not alerting enough people that they're soon might be in the 100-year floodplain.
That really takes us into the next question I had for you. If someone just loves a home in let's say, the 100-year floodplain, what should they consider financially? And again, you said people buy in the 100-year floodplain all the time. You live in the 100-year floodplain. I actually live in the 100-year floodplain as well. So what should they consider, but specifically financially, if they're planning to purchase in the 100-year floodplain?
I think we're not advising enough people to go figure out what the 500-year base flood elevation is for that particular property. We're only accustomed to getting these elevation certificates, if they were required. So it is an additional $450, but I'm begging people throughout Houston, go get an elevation certificate, and on the elevation certificate and the survey, find the 500-year base flood elevation, because your current base flood elevation is no longer going to be valid with the new maps. The base flood will change. And so you need to know the 500-year. If you do work, one of those questions earlier about regulations in the county, if you do regulation in the city, you have to prove that whatever you're doing is 2 feet above the 500-year base flood elevation. So you got to know the 500-year base flood elevation. The 100-year base flood elevation is an irrelevant number to me for regulatory
Mhm.
purposes. If you are 1 foot above that 100-year base flood elevation today, your insurance would be cheaper, most likely, or maybe not required. But soon you're going to need the 500-year base flood elevation, or you even need that for regulatory purposes in all of these cities in Harris County now. So to go do an addition, you need that information. If you spend a significant amount of money, you do new construction. Of course, we're all building at 2 feet above the 500-year base flood elevation. These topics can be very cumbersome. I mean, but knowing where to find this information, get the 500-year base flood elevation now, and see if you're 2 feet above it. And if that house in the 100-year floodplain is well above 2 feet above the 500-year base flood elevation, your insurance is likely to remain low, even if it's required soon. You're probably at less risk of flooding that particular structure, although you might get some water into the garage or something. But that's a pretty good indication. It's why we've used it. And look, is that a little higher than it needs to be? Yes. But the politicians, thank God, aren't that stupid. The houses that we build today are going to last 30, 50, 100 years. We need to
Mhm.
design to be resilient for 2026 and 2036 and 2056 also, right? So we can't be
Mhm.
on the cutting edge of where the water is today. We must plan for greater intensity. We must plan for future climate events. And I think that's
Mhm.
what these regulations that we've done, both in the city of Houston and Harris County and the surrounding municipalities, have been trying to do. Ensure that the housing stock or the commercial buildings that we're building are more resilient for a longer period of time. But yeah, knowing that elevation, we've got, the insurance reform doesn't require the same elevation certificate. So it's not on our mind as much as it used to be because it's not as required. It's still necessary for regulatory purposes if you do work. And it's very good information to have. And to get it when you're already getting a survey or an elevation certificate, it costs $0 to add the $500 500-year information, zero. And even if you're in the 500-year floodplain, you're going to need this. So go get it now where it's not going to cost near as much as if you need it all of a sudden.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, you've mentioned a few ideas already, but besides insurance, what else can residents do to reduce
Yeah.
their flood risk or prepare for a storm?
A lot of times it's the very small things. We like this adopt a drain. You can go to the city of Houston, go to adopt a drain, but it's a cognizant deal that we all should be more aware of the drains in our neighborhood, not just the one
Mhm.
immediately from your house or whatever, but making sure that debris. Look, the storm sewer system is designed to hold storm water, and it's going, into that drain in the street, then it's going to the bayou, and then it's going onto the Gulf of Mexico. Everything that we put in that storm sewer, a leaf, a water bottle, a Coke can, a trash bag, an HEB bag, those things make less room for water. So you want to have more room for water. So ensure that your storm drains in your neighborhood are cleared out more regularly. Say we all kind of use this adopt a drain deal to remind people to do it for 4 or 5 times a year. The ditches in front of our houses in many neighborhoods are designed to hold water. They're actually a more effective place to hold water than the storm sewer system. But most of our ditches are filled with debris and silt and sand and things. So clearing out
Mhm.
the ditch in front of your house, clearing out your gutters, getting these rain barrels. The sea gives them away half the time, so you could hold a little water in your rain barrel. Any place that detention and retention are what they really are. We're holding water for periods of time before it goes someplace else. Because if you don't, you flood the system, whether that's the bayou or the storm sewer system or anything else. And
Mhm.
really, the people's drains, we buy a new construction, it has the drains in the back, but we don't clean out those drains. Much like we don't clean out our dryer vent either, but if you blew the dryer vent ever so often, it'd be more effective. You got to blow out the drains in the back of your yard, because I am very
Mhm.
nervous about water in the backyard not having a clear channel to get to the front yard. And
Mhm.
I'm a realist. Many of these drains we talk about they don't work because the drain is designed to go uphill to the street, and it doesn't go uphill. It's not
Mhm.
effective at all. So we have to find, much like we have sump pumps and things under the house, but you know, and then the most important thing too is be aware of development in your surrounding area. It's not just
Mhm.
your neighborhood. Your neighborhood that has never flooded before will be impacted by development upstream. I mean, there you have to be aware of upstream. We've done, the city and people in regulatory power have done a much better job of lowering the lake levels in Conroe and Lake Houston and Lake Livingston when we have storms, rapid storms in central Texas, because we know the more water that we can then hold in Lake Conroe or Lake Houston is less likely that people in Kingwood or Porter or the surrounding areas are going to flood. So that's an example of a large scale something being done, but the small scale stuff is more important also. I mean, you'd be surprised what just a little, I mean, a lot of people flood with just a nominal amount of water, but 1 inch of rainfall, 1 inch of water rising and going into your home and under your hardwood floors and seeping there, and the mold then seeping up into the walls 2 and 3, 4 feet behind the cabinets, that could be hundreds of thousands of dollars of damage. You
Mhm.
might be living there for months in a moldy condition, impacting your health before you really ever realize it. These small things can save you from that happening or whatever. So, I mean, I
Mhm.
know it doesn't sound like it's much, but the incremental things all do make a very large difference.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bill. So you mentioned FEMA, you mentioned Buyers Aware, and you mentioned local municipality websites. Are there any other tools or websites that you recommend for checking flood risk or staying informed?
Well, definitely Harris County Flood Control, which is
Mhm.
their acronym, Harris County Flood Control District.org or whatever. Their alert system is very good. I would go there. I would sign up for the alerts. I would learn how to look into the watersheds for the active construction projects that are happening there. Again, those upstream that are making significant progress in helping people from flooding. I mean, while we have so many houses that flood at risk, all of these projects, from the City of Houston projects to TxDOT projects to Harris County Flood Control District, they're all designed to help people get out of harm's way. If we complete the North Canal, we have the ability to get 100,000 homes out of harm's way, out of the 100-year
Mhm.
floodplain. These projects can make a difference, but they do take a long period of time. So, Harris County Flood Control District, going to Map Next, which is a website that we promote, telling you about the new flood maps and the procedure that's going to happen there. Also through Harris County Flood Control District. The City of Houston has an alert system. I think they're very effective. My office is in the Heights, and so with the Bayou at White Oak and I-10 gets and it tells me it got 1 inch of rain in 15 minutes, it got 4 inches of rain in 15 minutes. Each one of those little alerts now causes me to be able to figure out, am I going to drive differently than I did before? I'm well aware of this area. Every other exit is, one's under the interstate, one's over the interstate. So I know if there's a flooding event, I'm not going to be able to take Houston Avenue that goes down. I'm going to have to take Sawyer Avenue, or I'm not going to be able to take Studewood that goes down. I'm going to have to take Shepherd that goes over. Even knowing that can keep significant numbers of cars from flooding, from keeping people getting stuck in an area that they can't get back out of. So that alert system I find very valuable. Transtar also has a very good website. I like during the middle of a storm, because if you're traveling, again, you're in the woodlands and you want to figure out, can I get to work, or I'm in Katy, can I get anywhere? Transtar's and their camera system is very good for the interstate system. I find it extremely valuable if there's a rainfall event or a massive amount of water coming at any particular time. So I really like those. There's a lot of those things out there. First Street has a flood risk rating that is very common. It's what Zillow uses. Many commercial entities subscribe or use First Street for their flooding risk or whatever. It's another one that people should be aware of outside of Buyers Aware. What I like about Buyers Aware, like I said, it mentioned the number of policies and the number of claims in a very small census tract, but there's a number of good websites out there.
Wonderful. And we've shared links to several of those websites in the comments for anybody that's looking for them. As we wrap here, Bill, I'd love to hear just your number one piece of advice for anyone living in Houston, whether they rent, own, or they're looking to buy.
I mean, I think the awareness that the past is not going to be indicative of the future. Okay, just because I haven't flooded in the past doesn't mean I don't have a flood risk in the future. Maybe the long future, maybe the short time future. I don't really know. The events are every event is significantly different, and that's what we really don't do a good job of describing. We're going to have another hurricane. There's no doubt we're going to have a hurricane. It could be a major wind event and not even a flooding event. We need to be prepared for that, right? I mean, we need to be resilient in many different ways. These trees and things, the impact we've had from just a freeze is another type of event. But I think that being aware that the climate is changing, the topography continues to change, the development pattern changes regularly. It means something. I try and explain. I could be 50 years old and never had a car wreck, but the risk for me having a car wreck for the next 10 years is probably greater. We're adding 100,000 people to my neighborhood. My eyesight's getting worse. There's going to be construction projects that we never had before. All of those things impact whether or not I'm going to have a car wreck in the future, right? The same is true for a water event. Just because we haven't had one in the past doesn't mean that your level of risk is not increasing or decreasing. The risk does decrease. We are making progress in getting people out of harm's way. But awareness is really the thing that we need to do. And don't, say the 100-year floodplain is irrelevant in my world. I'm not scared of the 100-year floodplain. I'm not stigmatized by the 100-year floodplain. But at the same time, I don't have a warm, fuzzy feeling just because I'm not in the 100-year floodplain. That directing people to the map to determine their level of risk is not remotely accurate. That's not determining your level of risk. It's determining whether or not that lands in the 100-year floodplain or not. That's it. That's not a level of risk. There are many other factors that are far more important to determine your level of risk.
Wonderful. Well, Bill, you've given so much great information. Several people have said in the comments they really enjoyed this, and we really thank you for your time.
Thank you. Like I said, we have these flood videos on har.com/flood. We update them pretty good. There's 4 pretty good videos there. And I do teach a class. I'd love to come teach anyone else. It's 2 hours. So it's pretty informative. So, and consumers could come to these classes too. I hold them at different homeowners associations all the time. So let's just get the information out so everyone has all this information that they need to make accurate decisions.
Fabulous. Well, thank you again, Bill, for your time. This was another great conversation. And that is it for this HAR Community Conversations. We will be back next month. We'll see you then. Bye bye.
Thank you.